Welcome back. My name is Dr. Carl Baird, and today I'll be showing you how to lift something from the floor without injuring your lower back. Lifting is by far one of the most common ways that people injure their lower back, and it can be from lifting something very heavy, like helping a friend lift a piece of furniture, or something very light. We also see a lot of people who just lifting their pants up, their back goes out, and it's just a simple little movement that if you do it wrong, too much force goes through the structures of your spine and leads to lower back pain. So what we're going to do today are show you a few things you can do to protect yourself when you're lifting something from the floor to avoid injuring your lower back. So let's go ahead and get started. So when we're going to lift something up off the ground, the first thing we have to consider is where we position our body in relation to that object. So ideally, we want that object to be as close to the body as I can. So what I mean by that, if I'm going to lift up this kettlebell from the ground, I want to keep that object nice and close. If I position myself too far away and try to lift from here, you can see my lower back is already starting to round. If I go to lift from this position, it's going to put a lot of stress on that lower back, which is why it's important to position yourself closer to the weight, so when you come down to get that, you can keep that nice neutral spine and protect your lower back. Now, you've probably heard the term lift with your legs and not with your lower back. It's really good advice, but how do you accomplish that? That's what we're going to focus on with this next tip. And the key is to keep your hips down and keep your chest up. So what I mean by that, again, if I'm coming to lift this kettlebell, I want to keep my hips down and my chest pointing relatively forward so that when I'm lifting, my spine stays in that nice neutral position. What happens if I don't get my hips down, I start rounding at the low back to get here, and if I lift from here, that's a lot of force through the lower back. Or if I get my hips down but my chest is pointed forward towards the ground, again, that was a little bit of rounding at the low back, and if I go to lift from here, a lot of that force is going to go through my lower back, increasing the risk that I injure the joints and structures of the lower back. So what we want to do is really keep our hips down while keeping our chest up, pressing through the floor to lift from there. It's important to keep your core engaged when performing the lifting movement. One of the most common reasons that people injure their lower back with lifting is that their core is not engaged, so all of that lifting force ends up going through the structures of their spine and leading to pain. And that's one of the common reasons that you can injure your low back, even with lifting something light. It's not that your core is not strong enough to lift that object, but it's that the core didn't engage when we needed it to engage. All that force ends up going through your spine, and that's when your lower back gives out. And so to avoid that, all we need to do is do a slight abdominal brace. And so what I mean by that, it doesn't mean squeezing as hard as you can like that, but it does mean just a slight brace. You could pretend like if somebody were about to kind of hit you in the stomach, you kind of brace. That's about the level of tension that we want. So when we get down into our lifting position, just do that slight brace. That's going to engage your core to really protect your lower back as you lift that movement. One of the things we want to avoid while we're lifting is lifting our hips up first instead of at the same time as our trunk. So what I mean by that is a lot of times people will get into the perfect starting position, but when they go to lift, they'll lift their hips up first and then secondarily lift it up like that. And so again, you can tell when I lift my hips up first, that puts a lot of that rounding movement in my lower back, which if I go to lift from there, is just a lot of stress through the structures of the lower back, which increases the likelihood that we injure the low back. So when we're lifting, we want to make sure that our trunk and our hips lift up at the same time, so we keep that neutral spine as we lift on up. Another thing that we want to avoid when we're lifting from the ground is combining it with a twisting movement. So this lifting and twisting is one of the most common ways that people injure their lower back. And so we really want to avoid that if we're worried about injuring our low back while we lift up from the ground. So just to show you what that looks like, again, you lift from the ground. Again, a lot of people combine it with that bad form and that rounded back. And then as they lift, they twist up like that. Just a lot of force going through the structures of your spine that we don't want. So instead, what I would recommend that you do is lift all the way up and then use your feet to turn instead of twisting at your lower back. It's just really hard to brace and protect the structures of your lower spine with that twisting movement. Yeah. The last thing that you can focus on to help lift something from the ground without hurting your lower back is learning how to engage your hamstrings. This is really helpful, especially when you're lifting up something heavy from the ground. So what I mean by that is, let's say we're lifting up something heavy. We get into the perfect starting position here. My chest is up, my hips are down, my spine is in a nice straight position. Now before I lift, what I can do is develop some tension in my hamstrings. And by developing that tension, I can ensure that the lift is being done by my hamstrings and my glutes, which is what we want, and not my lower back. And so what it looks like, you come from the ground, and then you just lift your hips up slightly. So you can see just that slight lift creates a lot of tension in my hamstrings here, which then I can use to lift that weight up from the ground. Now the only thing you have to be careful of when you're engaging these hamstrings is it's not lifting your hips up like that and rounding the back. It's keeping that spine in a nice neutral position, slightly lifting the hips to create that tension, and then you lift from there. So there you have it. Following these simple tips is going to be the best way to decrease the likelihood of injuring your lower back as you lift something up off the ground. If you do have any questions about any of these tips or your specific case, leave them in the comments below. I do read them all. I'm very happy to respond. I wanted to thank you one more time for being here. I really do appreciate all of your support. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Hey, it's Dr. Baird here. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube page to catch all our videos designed to help you build the strength and confidence to live active, healthy, and happy lives. You won't find it anywhere else.